Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Session 3 of our E-Rate overview. For those of you who are new to E-Rate, it's Roxy, Sue, and Adam again. This session will be a little more lengthy than our previous two because we are really getting into the two main forms for the E-Rate season, which are your 470 and your 471. This session will be recorded and posted on our website like the previous two for your reference, and the slide deck will be put there as well. So you don't have to write everything down if you don't want to, because the slide deck will be posted. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. Compliance and post, this doesn't look normal. Compliance and post commitment.
Yes, we did 470, Roxy.
Okay.
Previously, we're actually doing the post commitment. Yeah, compliance post commitment.
That's right.
So
that's right.
471 PIAs, 486s.
That's exactly right. Perfect. Okay. So, sorry. I did look over this before we even started, but I thought, wait a minute. Okay.
You're
so
having the Monday blues.
I am having the Monday blues. So training topics today, we're going to talk about the application review process, funding commitment, documentation retention, program compliance, and the other reviews you may run into with funding. All right, so this is where I got to 471 when I reviewed this. So we're going to review some things we talked about previously. First of all, with your 471, Sue likes to call this PIA. Is that what you call it? PIA?
PIA, yes.
Like a chia head. I just call it PIA until I met Sue. It took me several weeks to figure out what in the world was she saying. She calls it PIA. I call it PIA. But everybody goes through program integrity assurance. In other words, they're trying to make sure you're not attempting to commit fraud with your application. So after you submit your 471, USAC is going to review your application. You're going to get asked for your quotes. They're going to ask you questions about what you're purchasing. They're going to ask you eligibility questions, all sorts of things. And that's very, very typical. So you shouldn't be surprised. You should get a program integrity assurance review as soon as you submit your 471, Category 2 and Category 1. So that is typical. Everybody should get PIAs. Now, this is where some of you can get in trouble, not responding to these requests. You have 15 days to respond. You can also request one 7-day extension. But you have to respond to these, or you can run the risk of not getting funded, okay? So to answer these, you have to go into the portal. You go to Related Actions and choose Respond to Inquiries. That's how you get to them. So you open your 471, you go to Related Actions and choose Respond to Inquiries. But also, even easier than that, on your landing page in your portal, you'll see inquiries right there on your landing page, and you can get to them from there. If you're really stumped and you can't find your inquiries, contact one of us, your person, whether it be Sue, the new person we're going to bring on very, very soon, Adam, or myself, and we can help you get to the inquiry. We can help you read it, understand it, and help you know how to respond to it. So all you have to do is ask for help. Don't sit on it, because it might be something that you really have to work toward getting an answer for. So make sure you respond in a timely manner. If you have to make any changes, let's say you need to change a service or a number or an entity, change it before you get your FCDL. That's simply a RAL process. It can be changed in the portal, and it's very easy to do, and it doesn't send you through a lot of unnecessary PIA back and forth with your reviewer. So if you run across anything like, let's say, you accidentally put in 105 access points, but you meant to put in 110, then we can change that in the RAL. Or you meant to ask for it for 5 schools. Well, you're not really doing it by schools anymore. But when you were figuring how many access points you needed to order, you forgot to think about a certain school. So now you need to order more. So you can make all those changes to your 471 before you get your FCDL. Okay? So make those changes before you actually get that funding commitment through the RAL process. And yes, you do that in the portal, and yes, we can show you how to do that. All right, let's talk about funding commitments. All right, the FCDL, your funding commitment decision letter. Once your PI is finished, you and your service provider will receive your notification of the commitment from USAC and the FCC, and that's your FCDL. You will get that via an email. It'll also come in a notification in the portal, and we see it as well. The FCDL will include USAC's decision on how much funding you will receive according to what you asked for and what decisions were made during PIA. You'll either get everything you asked for or a reduced funding. Maybe something went on during PIA and you were over budget, so that had to be reduced. Or they had to change a part from Z to A. So that change will be reflected during your funding commitment decision letter. Or that's a modification. Or maybe they're denying all of your funding for some strange reason. So that would be reflected. So those FCDLs are going to be emailed to the contact person on the 471 and also are going to be on your EPC landing page. If you disagree with any of the decisions that come out in the FCDL, you can file an appeal. Okay? All right. And this is kind of what the FCDLs look like. This is one of ours, so it's quite huge, but they come out in the blue and white. They'll tell you what was committed. They'll tell you a waive. They'll give you your bin. They'll name your 471, give you your number here. And then over here, this is all the stuff you need to read. This will also come out in a spreadsheet. So you'll have a letter, and then you'll have a spreadsheet. Now, in your spreadsheet, this will go all the way across in one row. And all I did here was just transpose this so it shows up in 2 columns instead of all the way across one row. But it'll tell you your FRN, your 471, whether you were funded or denied. It'll tell you the service type, the 470. It'll tell you all the information that you put on the 471. It'll give you the months, all your contract information. It'll tell you the pre-discount, what your discount rate was, and how much they're committing. Okay, give you your waive number, so forth and so on. So you need to keep that documentation and put it in your E-rate, I'll call it a folder, whether it'll be a digital folder or a paper folder or notebook or binder or whatever you're keeping. All right, so now you've gotten your FCDL. What happens? Next up.
All right. And so the next up, the important part is SIPA, which hopefully you guys have heard about and learned a little bit about, you may have already known about, and that is, of course, the Children's Internet Protection Act. And if you think about it in a way of 1, 2, 3, it's your Internet Safety Policy, your Technology Protection Measure, and a public notice and hearing and meeting. And so that revolves around also the FCC Form 86, which we'll talk about in a second. But the big thing is to document everything. And so we'll talk about that in the next coming up slides here. So just a little background on SIPA. It requires that you, as a school or library, to enforce certain safety measures that protect your students and your adults, actually, and minors to obscene content on the internet. And there's those 3 requirements as well that we just showed you, the policy, protection, and public notice. So the 3 Ps, I guess, if you want to call it that. The school or library must maintain documentation demonstrating that they are working toward compliance in the first year or that they are in compliance. So that's a big thing we want to stress to you, is that you have to be able to prove that you are abiding and you are compliant with SIPA, and you do that in the form of big time documentation. And so the safety policy that your school or district has to address all of these points. So the access by minors to inappropriate matter on the internet, the safety and security of minors while using electronic mail, chat rooms, and other forms of electronic communication, unauthorized access including hacking or other unlawful activities, unauthorized disclosure, use, or dissemination of personal information regarding those minors, and measures designed to restrict the minor's access to materials harmful to other minors. And it also, as of 2012, must include monitoring of the online activities. And as part of the SIPA certification, they must certify that their internet safety policies have been updated to provide for educating minors about appropriate online behavior. And so that is a big thing. It's kind of like a cyberbullying or updated policy that your school or district has to keep up with to basically say you have a policy as far as discipline and what you're doing and how to prevent and your measures against the cyberbullying and other online activity.
So we call that the education piece.
Yeah.
So in other words, you could add a number 4, if you would, to Adams 1, 2, and 3, because number 4 is the education piece. You have to educate the children as far as appropriate online behavior.
All right, and then this is the number 2, kind of about your technology protection measure, which is a filter. And if you are on the NC-RED network and you utilize Zscaler, that is exactly what that is. And so it's basically a specific technology that blocks or filters internet access. And so to be SIPA compliant, you must have the filter and it must be enabled. You must have your policies, and you also need to make sure that you document how you're using the filter and that it's working, et cetera, for SIPA. And decisions about what matter is inappropriate for minors are made by the local community, school board, educational agency, library, or other authority. And so this one is about the public notice or hearing. So you have to provide public notice and hold at least one public meeting or meetings to address the internet safety policy. And so we definitely recommend not only documenting the public notice and the hearings, but also document how you showed it was public. So if you're putting it on your website, take a screenshot of that. Put it up in your front office. Take a picture of the sign up in your front office, document it. Make sure that it is easily accessible to every one of your stakeholders or your family, school, students. It has to be accessible to everyone. So if someone may not have a computer access, that's why it would be in your front office to cover making sure that you address your entire population. And again, additional meetings are not necessary even if the policy is amended unless those meetings are required by state or local rules or the policy itself. So for example, if your policy says we are going to revisit this in 2 years to make sure that it is updated properly or showing the most up-to-date measures, then you could almost set your policy to enable yourself to document. But it's only that initial meeting is required for the compliance part for E-rate. And it says below is a list, but it's actually on the next slide. So in that list, we'll go through documentation that will be requested to demonstrate that you're SIPA compliant during an audit. and make sure that you retain copies of that documentation for each funding year where SIPA certification is required. And so you're going to want to not only keep track of your meetings and everything, but each funding year, keep track of how you are staying compliant. So like Roxy mentioned, your education piece, make sure that you are documenting each school year, each funding year, how you are staying SIPA compliant. And again, the biggie here is minimum of 10 years. If you've been doing this for 12 years from now, if it's 12 years, keep it. But you have to keep a minimum of 10 years from the last day of the applicable funding year or the service delivery deadline. So it's not just 10 years from the beginning, it's 10 years from your last day of the applicable funding year. And so these are those points that we're talking about. So that's a copy of your internet safety policy and documentation that your school or library gave the public notice and held a public meeting. And that just kind of goes into notice with a copy of a website announcement, advertisement or local newspaper, kind of up in the front office, email blasts, those kind of things. However you manage to do that, just make sure you're covering all of your stakeholders. And since 2011, entities have been required at a minimum to keep some record of when public notice was provided and when the hearing or meeting took place. So you'll want to make sure that you get a copy of your board or your meeting minutes and your agenda showing that it was on the agenda list of that meeting to go over your safety policy. And then the documentation that you adopted the policy. So approval in the minutes. So not only that it was on the minutes themselves, but shows that it was approved or the motion was approved. And documentation of the adoption, so the hearing, we went through that, and a description of your filter. And so it might be a good idea to kind of go through and describe a little bit of how your Zscaler works, or if you have custom policies that, we make sure that we address this topic, and make sure to note all that. A report or other documentation of the use of the filter. So it should show that your filter was installed and working during the funding year. So if you want to run some kind of usage report, if you have maybe a test user and you go through and access a few of the websites to show that your filter is actually working and that it is being SIPA compliant, and archive logs, etc. So you'll want to maybe keep track of your web logs, just have a couple examples to show them during an audit that not only that you have the filter, but that it is filtering appropriately. And then copies of your FCC Form 479 and or your 486. And you file a 486 too, basically notify USAC that your services have started for you, the recipient, and for all of your FRNs, and to indicate the status of compliance with SIPA for you being the recipient of the services.
Sorry, I'm writing a note to everyone in the chat. Following up on what Adam just told you about SIPA, it would probably be a good idea to keep a SIPA tab in your notebook or a digital folder per funding year, and that way you have everything you need in one place. So if you're audited for that funding year, then you can just pull out that SIPA tab of information, and you're probably going, oh, do they do SIPA audits? Why, yes, they do.
All right, so when is my service start date? I think Roxy and Sue can confirm this. For us, it is always July 1 of that funding year. So it's kind of easily summed up.
Do not change the service start date from July 1. I don't care if you get your funding commitment decision letter in February. Do not change the service start date from July 1. Everybody, repeat after me.
Do not change your service start date
from July
July 1. This is not a recording. This is a PSA.
That sums up that slide, everyone, y'all.
It matters not as to when you get your FCDL, prior to July 1 or after July 1. It matters not as to when you cut your purchase order for your equipment. Put July 1 as the service start date. Why? Because that's the beginning of the funding year. If you put a different date on your 486, your 486 will not be approved. It will go into review, where it will sit for months on end until someone decides to pick it up and start asking you questions about it. Do not change that date. It should be July 1 to June 30, okay? Period. Okay, I'm done now.
Oh, next slide.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir.
That's okay. All right, so your Form 486 must be certified no later than 120 days after the service start date reported on the form, or 120 days after the date of your funding commitment decision letter, FCDL. So we recommend you get your notification from us and from USAC, hey, here's your funding commitment decision letter. As soon as you're reading through it and you're toasting and you're super excited, file your 486. That way you don't forget, you don't want to wait 120 days. As soon as you get your FCDL, go in there and just put it an automatic thing in your head. Oh, I got my FCDL, time to do that 486, it's done, boom, you're good to go. And what if you file it late, which we hope you don't do? If you miss the deadline, they will adjust your service start date to a date 120 days before the date you certified your form. And here's the biggie, your funding commitment may be reduced to reflect the reduction in service time. So we definitely do not want that. And if you wish to appeal a USAC decision on adjusting your service start date, you must first file the appeal with USAC and not the FCC. We really don't want to get in that situation if we can help it.
And we will email you because we know when your 46 is due. We will email you principal. We will find you on Facebook. I have done all of these things in the past 8 weeks. So please, I like Facebook pages, but they're coming from my personal account because the state will not give me one.
So really, best practices, folks, as soon as you get your FCDL, turn around and file your Form 486.
Yep.
It doesn't matter if you're going to wait and order your equipment 2, 3, 4 months from now. Just file your Form 486. It's done. It's checked off. Okay, just file it.
And your vendors will know because they're looking to make sure that if you've got a WAN service from them, that they can actually start it up and know they're going to get paid.
Okay, Adam, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
All right. And urgent reminder notification, and this is the USAC reminder notification. Your favorite 3 E-rate coordinators will also be doing urgent reminder notifications. So we will all be issuing you letters and reminders to make sure that you do your 486 within the allotted amount of time.
Yeah, we don't want you to miss that on your money.
No. All right, next is after post-commitment. And make sure that I don't want to take it from Sue this time. Okay, I got a couple more slides.
This is you.
All right.
Yep.
Okay. SPI
you already did. You took the whole 46 of the thing, but it's all good. Have fun.
Oh, that wasn't my notes that I had from our meeting. I apologize. So SPI billing is the discounted billing where your vendor invoices USAC for the discount amount, and then the vendor invoices the applicant, you, for the non-discounted amount. And a BEAR, or 472, is where you pay all of the costs, and then you file your Form 472 to be reimbursed later on. And in order to do that, you must have a Bear PIN and also a 498. So that's something else we recommend. It's a one and done form with your banking information that is filled out by your finance department. It's probably a good idea. Just hop on, get it done, and once it's done, it's done.
And actually, they've done away with the Bear pins.
Oh, okay.
We missed taking this part out. You don't have to have a PIN anymore. You do have to fill out a form to have access to the Bear system. And when you log into the Bear system, you just have to put your BIN in, your build entity number, and then you can have access to the Bear system. But they have done away with the PIN numbers now. So sorry, we used this last year, this slide, and we forgot to take out the PIN. So they don't have PINs anymore.
First-time registrants for Bear Access, do they not need to supply a current 471? Like if they hadn't filed for Bear yet, you know, during funding year 21 when since they've made this change, I thought they had to actually have an open active 471.
Well, yeah.
And then they'll have the Bear Access from here forward.
Yes.
I think it's just to make sure that they're not somebody.
Exactly. You have to, I mean, you have to have a reason to be Bear anyway. So, yep, you're correct.
I need a rug in my living room.
You have to have a living room first. So, yeah, makes sense, girl. Moving on.
Yes. All right, for funding year 26 and forward, all post-commitment decisions are communicated through the revised funding commitment decision letter, or RFCDL, in your EPIC portal. And that includes any appeals you've made, any spin changes, service substitutions, or Form 500. All of those Sue will be talking about in just a few seconds. And for previous funding years, paper letters for appeal decisions and email notifications. So now everything is nice and in the portal for you to be able to see.
Okay, appeals.
All right. And what is an appeal? So now we're going to go through all those things we just talked about. Appeal is a request for review filed by a program participant who disagrees with the USAC decision. So for example, if you applied for $1 million worth of funding, they come back and say, we're denying half of it for reason X. You can say, I disagree with that, and you can go through and you can make an appeal on that USAC decision, and they are also filed in your EPC portal. And this is what you include. So obviously your applicant BIN or service provider SPIN, your contact information, including all your basics there, and the name of the person who can discuss the appeal. So that might be something of note to make sure that you put in who can discuss the appeal with them. And what the nickname for the appeal is with USAC in detail. And then the funding year and your FRN associated with the appeal. So if you only are appealing, if you have 10 FRN lines, but you're only going to appeal 1 or 2, just put in those 1 or 2. And a copy of, or description copy of the decision that they made so that you can easily go back and they can see what exactly you're appealing. All right, and that's, again, what to include, which is basically this is more about your response. And so a narrative that explains precisely what relief is being sought. So that basically says what it is you're looking to have USAC do, or what is the purpose of your appeal? Is it to get the money back, be refunded, you know exactly what your decision is, and again, a copy of the decision letter that you got from them that you're appealing. And then of course you'll want to include supporting documentation such as forms or previous correspondence that support you and why you are appealing in the decision that you are ultimately looking for. And if you fail to respond, this is big here, within the time prescribed, they will basically review your appeal with what they have. So if you submit 2 of the 5 documents and then you forget about the other 3, they're only going to make a decision past that time limit based on what you gave them. So if you don't give them all the information, they're not going to be able to make a decision, and your appeal may be denied because you went past the time limit to even get all the documentation that you need into the portal. All right, and so granting appeals. So appeals may be granted under the following limited circumstances. So if they made an error in its initial review, and so if your reviewer, your PIA reviewer made an error, that's an area where you might be able to be granted the appeal when the filer, you, provides USAC with new information or documentation it did not provide when the original request was made. So if you went through and when you submitted all your things for your funding year, you may have forgotten a quote, or the quote changed, or something happened, and you have new information, you would want to submit that so that they can see. They may be able to grant your appeal based on that. And also, when USAC receives policy clarification or a new policy impacts the decision. So if something happens where you were denied or something you're appealing, and say 50 or 100 other schools around had the same problem, and they've adjusted their policy based on new information they receive, you can go back and your appeal may be granted based on something that they changed universally, not just for you. And if you are seeking a waiver of an FCC rule, you must file with the FCC. So if we kind of think back to our first training session where we had those circles, so USAC is kind of the next step before the FCC. So if you are seeking a waiver on a rule for an FCC, you contact the FCC directly. Anything we need to add, ladies, or can we go to the next slide? There we go. So how will you be notified if you do file an appeal? So you'll receive an appeal confirmation letter that's going to say, confirmed, we've got your appeal. If they have questions, they'll reach out through the portal, much like a PIA review, I would say, and they issue its appeal decision in a revised FCDL. So remember that term again, the RFCDL. If the applicant or service provider does not agree with the decision, that's when you file with the FCC. So that's when you kind of go past filing an appeal with USAC and you go directly to the FCC. And I think it is now time to turn it over to my girl Sue to talk about the next topics and pretty much close us out.
Helps if I unmute myself. Hey, folks. Better? Can anyone hear me or no?
I can hear you, Sue.
Okay. So spin changes. What happens when your service provider needs to be changed? There's 2 different reasons for that. One is a corrective spin change. These usually happen when conglomerates become larger. Your little, local carrier gets gobbled up by a bigger carrier, and so on and so forth. An operational spin change is a little bit more challenging. This comes about when your service provider can't provide the service. There's a bunch of different rules and things that apply, and we'll discuss those on the next screens. So a corrective spin change can be requested, as I mentioned, from mergers and acquisitions. Data entry errors. We all know there's like 1,000 Verizons out there, 1,000 Comcasts if we pick the wrong one. and other changes that you did not create. So you have to think about what happens in the vendor world, so to speak. It also could be other carriers, you know, lost the ability to provide those services. So something that you did not create. When do you file them? You can file them up until the last date you have to invoice. So remember, Adam mentioned the FCDL. The FCDL gives you when you can start your services, and you've got so many days. Okay, I'm reading texting at the same time. Sorry, I'm not good at that. You've got so many days after your last invoice in order to make that spin change. Service providers can initiate these changes due to mergers, acquisitions, or consolidations. And corrective spin changes can also be made before your commitment by filing a RAL, as Roxy mentioned earlier. So you could reach out to your peer reviewer for that change. Next slide. Operational spin changes are rule-based. So first and foremost, you know, whatever's allowable under state and local procurement rules, allowable under the terms of the contract between the applicant and the original service provider. You have to notify the original service provider of your intent to change. The reason to change has to be recognized by the rules as legitimate, as in a breach of contract, unable to provide service. Not, you know, you just can't say, yeah, I want to go to these other people because they're a lower price now. And the new service provider must be the runner-up from your original bid evaluations. When can you file these? You can file your request after your FCDL and on or before your last date to invoice. And service substitutions. Service substitutions are changes to specific products or services as they were originally approved. They must have the same functionality as the original products. They cannot violate any contract provisions or state or local procurement rules. They cannot result in an increase in the percentage of ineligible services or functions, or must not result, right? And must be within the scope of the establishing Form 470, including your RFP documents for the original products or services. An example of that, because this is something that came up during this past year with inventory shortages, folks were not able to buy just the module for their chassis switch. But if they were buying the chassis, they were buying the modules, and they were buying the transceivers, the modules are no longer available. But they could change, instead of buying the chassis, the module, and the transceivers, to buying the bundled chassis module receiver. This would still be a service substitution because it is a different part number in the manufacturers, and the peer reviewers would be going through their online catalogs to make sure it's still an eligible service. Next, thank you. In general, to continue when you can file these, after you've received your RAL, and on or before the last day to receive the service. Service providers can file a global service substitution request to replace one product or service with another across all funding requests, usually again because the product or service is being discontinued. In a related program that USAC has been administering, Verizon was no longer able to provide a certain hotspot, so they did a global substitution to replace them all with a different hotspot. Next, extensions. You can file for a service delivery extension with the following. A funding commitment decision letter, an FCDL, is issued by USAC on or after March 1st of the funding year for which support is authorized. That's an automatic extension, not a problem. An operational service provider identification number changes and or service substitutions are approved by USAC on or after March 1st of the funding year. Automatic extension. The applicant requested an extension because the service provider was unable to complete delivery and installation for reasons beyond the service provider's control. This would require a Form 500 before September 30th of that funding year. Or the applicant requested an extension because the service provider has been unwilling to complete delivery and installation after USAC delayed payment while reviewing the application for program compliance. Again, requires a Form 500 before September 30th of the funding year. An invoice deadline extension. Applicants and service providers can request a one-time 120-day extension of the deadline to file an invoice, which is known as the FCC Form 472, or you've heard the word BEAR, Billed Entity Applicant Reimbursement Form, or FCC Form 474, which is the Service Provider Invoice or SPI form. You have to submit an invoice deadline extension on or before the invoice deadline date. You cannot wait until the next day and say, oh shoot. The deadline is 120 days after the last date to receive service or 120 days after the date of the FCC Form 46, whichever is later. If an invoice deadline extension is not timely submitted, you must first submit a waiver request to the FCC, and then the FCC must grant your waiver request before USAC can extend the invoice deadline. We talked about the FCC Form 500. Here we go. The FCC Form 500 is basically adjusting your approved funding requests. It basically is changing specific funding requests after USAC issued your FCDL. For example, if you have to extend the contract expiration date that you originally had listed on your Form 471, or changing the service date as it was showing on your Form 486. If you need to cancel or reduce a funding request number, for example, you might have a new project that was slated to start, in September of the funding year, but then your board says, yeah, no, we're not doing that, or cancellation of a funding request number, or requesting an extension of the deadline for delivery of non-recurring services. So this is specifically equipment. FCC Form 500 for Category 2 funding reductions. If you don't use all of your Category 2 funding commitment, you submit a Form 500 to return those committed funds, but not invoiced to your 5-year Category 2 budget. So again, your vendor tells you, you need 35 access points. You wind up going through the project and you really only needed 30. You're only going to get billed for 30. USAC's going to get billed for 30. You're going to file a Form 500 for the 5. Okay, that seems kind of obsolete, but the FCC Form 500 for funding year 2016 and forward, you file an EPIC. For funding year 2015 and previous funding years, it's all paper. We used to live by paper, folks, and you all are new to E-rate. I'm hoping none of these things apply to you, but you would complete the form on paper, you scan it, you create this Form 500 and EPIC, indicate you're filing for a funding year before funding year 2016. You're going to attach this scanned legacy Form 500 to certify. If you do not use all those Category 2 funding commitments, you have to file it to return the committed funds and attach a spreadsheet with the detailed allocation and the affected entities. Present, that's you.
Hey, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I lost my audio a while ago, so I had to switch systems. All right, so we're going to talk about program compliance and look at some other types of reviews. All right, first of all, let's talk about document retention. You have to keep all documentation for 10 years from the last date to receive service or the last date of action on that FRN. So if you are 5 years in, let's say you got a 7-year contract on your WAN, you're 5 years into that, you get a huge audit, then you got 10 years after that. In other words, my way of looking at it is don't get rid of anything. You can keep digital files these days, so just keep it. Keep it somewhere, don't get rid of it. If you keep paper files, I used to keep them both when I was in the school system doing this, and after so many years, I would get rid of the paper. I made sure I had digital as well, but I would get rid of paper that was more than 10 years old, and I had it, you know, paper and digital up to 10, got rid of the paper over 10, and each year I would just chunk that extra 10th year. Some of you are still paper people, and I get that. I'm a paper girl too. But, and when we talk about keeping documentation, we're not talking about just the forms. And we have a list on our website of things you need to keep, but anything to do with E-rate for that year, not only the forms, but bids, winning and losing, if you do a WAN. Notice I said winning and losing, so every bid that comes in. Vendor communication, emails between you and the vendors should be kept. And I don't mean keep them in your email in a folder called vendors. I mean put them with your email, put them with your E-rate stuff. You need the SIPA stuff. You need packing slips. You need POs. You need invoices. Now that the money comes in electronically, you need proof from finance that it got there, that it was deposited in your account. You need something printed out that it got there. You need proof of payment to your vendors that you have to get from finance when they cut that check or did a fund transfer, or however your vendors are paid. So you need all that documentation. You have to chase it down and put it in your notebook and or your digital files, however you're choosing to keep it. Contracts, everything related to your application. Every form from the 470 to the 471 to the 486 to the 479 to the 498, you name it, everything. So that's document retention. And it's also super important that you're not the only one that has access to these files, because as Sue loves to say, you might get hit by the lottery bus. And if I ever get hit by the lottery bus, I'm calling in Rich, and I don't care who does E-rate tomorrow. I really don't. So somebody else has to have access to your documents, and while I'm on the plane to Tahiti. Because I don't care who files the form tomorrow if I'm calling in Rich. So, and I know there's a lot of turnover at a charter school. We deal with it in our jobs every day. When school closes in June and we open back up in August, there's somebody new in that job, and they cannot get a hold of anything E-rate from the previous year. That is a problem. So it needs to be kept somewhere, not in somebody's specific Google Drive, but in a general area where more than one person has access to it. And also, more than one person needs to know how to do E-rate. There always needs to be a backup person. All right, asset inventory. You need to have one. If you don't, all E-rate equipment and locations need to be noted. You need to be tracking it by the serial numbers and the FRNs, which are the funding request numbers, and you need to track all moves and RMAs. And we've had a lot of questions about this. Let's say you put an access point in or a switch. 2 years in, it dies. Still under warranty, you do the RMA. You want to put something off your shelf into that place and then put the equipment that comes in off the RMA on the shelf. No, I'm sorry, that's not allowed. The E-rate equipment has to stay in place for 5 years. If it's under warranty and you file that RMA to get it replaced, that equipment that comes in to replace it must go in the place of the equipment that died. It does not go on the shelf, okay? And it must be tracked with a new serial number. You need to make a note in your inventory that the original equipment died, got hit by lightning, was in a flood. I don't know. Thor hit it with his hammer. But put your notes in there, put the RMA information in there, yada, yada, yada. Okay? All right. Gift rules. E-rate's big on gift rules. You can read about it here. I'm not going into it, but there's a fair and competitive rule, and there is an exception. You can do $20 or less. Vendors cannot bring Christmas presents in and leave them in your office because they're believed to be given an edge. No tickets to ball games, no tickets to concerts, no fruitcake, no cheesecake, no flowers, no poinsettias, nothing like that. There have been multi-million-dollar COMADs to districts right around us because of tickets to concerts from vendors during a bidding season, and big no-nos. Okay? Now, can you have equipment brought in for a trial basis to look at and to use, even though you might buy it or you might not buy it? Yes, there are rules around that, and the FCC knows those needs are there. So you need to read these pages and make yourself aware of the competitive bidding process and the gift rules. And if you will have noticed, there have been some big changes over the last few years in what the vendors have and have not been dropping off at your doorstep, and what they have and have not been sponsoring at conferences and lunches and that sort of thing, because the FCC has been coming down really hard on them for trying to purchase favoritism, if you will. Okay, compliance again. Let's talk about the red light rule. If an applicant or vendor fails to pay obligations to the government, meaning the Treasury, then you're going to fall into a red light status. Now, people in your finance department are very aware of the red light status, and technically before you do business with any vendor, you should check their status. They're either going to be green or they're going to be red. And before you do business with any vendor, you should check their status. And if they're red light, then you should not do business with them through E-rate. Our vendors are green. If they're red, then we will pull them. And but if you're going to go out on your own, like and do WAN, or if you're going to push your own Category 2 470, you need to make sure that the vendor that you decide to give your contract to is a green light status vendor and not under red. Whistleblowers. Sometimes there are those who don't, we'll just say don't do right. So if you need to do a whistleblower, there is a link here in this presentation where you can report violations to the FCC and USAC. And that's just what it is. You're reporting someone for cheating you, if you will, and not following the rules of E-rate. All right, so other reviews, I'm not going to go into these. You can read them, but these are big reviews or audits. First of all, the PQA. of which I just got another one for us here at the state, which is payment quality assurance. And this is where they're going to look at your invoices and making sure that, especially if you file bears, they're going to look at how much your invoice is, how much the bear was filed for, and make sure all that matches. And it matches your 471 and all that sort of thing. And it's pretty intense. The selective review, a lot of you folks get, and that is similar to a PQA, but they it requires a lot of paperwork on your end. They're going to go back and look at your competitive bidding. They're going to look at your 470. They're going to look at all the bids that came in. They're going to look at your matrix and how you chose your winning vendor. And they're going to look at the pricing that came in and make sure you use pricing as the highest point value so that you're looking at, you know, most bang for your buck, if you will. So selective review is very common. And if they have any findings for selective review, that it can also hold up any other future or delay, I'll say, any future 471 filings while they're trying to, you know, settle all that selective review out. BCAP, Beneficiary and Contributor Audit Program, this is where they come on site. These are kind of a random thing. I'll think of it as picking your name out of the hat. And they will send you a welcome email. They'll say you've been selected for a BCAP audit, and they'll tell you, it's usually for Category 2, and they'll tell you what FRNs they're looking at, and they'll ask you for a slew of information and tell you when it's due. Then the auditors, and this is a separate audit company, it's not USAC, they've hired different audit groups to come take care of all this. So then they'll say, okay, this is some more information of what we need to know, and then they'll come back and ask you more stuff, and they'll say, okay, now we need to come on site. And they'll work with you for setting 3 days or so for them to come on site, and then they'll want to look at your school, find all that hardware, if you will, and sit down and meet with you, your boss, sometimes the superintendent, you know, and ask questions, and you better be on your toes and know everything. And this is where your asset inventory comes into hand, because I just spent time at a school in 17, 18 with one of these, and they literally took that asset inventory and they looked at whatever year they were auditing, and they said, okay, so this is access point XYZ, you say it's in room ABC, let's go find it. And it better be where he said it was. And if it was in the ceiling, they climbed up to the ceiling, they took a picture of it, if they couldn't see it, and they blew it up, and they matched it to what he said. And if switch 1, 2, 3 was supposed to be in closet 1, then we went to closet 1 to see if switch 1, 2, 3 was in there, and it better be plugged in, working, and all the ports better be full, or there better be some explaining to do, Lucy. So, serious BCAP if you get a BCAP. And there's new audits coming out, which we'll send out some information soon on. But if you get any of these reviews, all you have to do is give us a yell, and we will help you work through them, okay? Including be on site with you, or at least I will, I have, and I'm sure the other guys wouldn't mind either, if the auditors come on site. I found it interesting. I just see what they do. Okay, so.
I've actually lived through my own in a previous life and crawled through network closets and ceilings, and yep, I got you back, Jack. I'll be with you.
Yep, we'll be with you. Yeah, we'll all come if you want to. All right, let's answer some of these questions, and then you can ask some more. So I'm going to scroll up to where the questions start in the chat. And one is, probably help if I put my glasses on. I could probably actually read them. Let's see here. Would there only be done if the vendor does not want to bill you back and us? Well, that is true, but I will tell you that they really should do SPI if you ask them to, because that's part of being a vendor with E-Rate is they kind of have to agree to do SPI billing if you ask for SPI billing, especially on recurring services like a WAN service or an internet service. You tell them you want SPI billing, they pretty much have to agree to it, or you can report them.
Roxy, just correct me if I'm wrong. All of our vendors on State Master Contract are required SPI or no?
Yes, ma'am, they are.
There you go.
Category 2 State Master Contracts are SPI billing. Okay, here's another question. What if we are new in this role and we've had a lot of change and they have no idea where info and files from the past are located? Oh boy. Well, if there is any way you can contact the previous person or get access to maybe a Google Drive that person, maybe the E-Rate, the email administrator, and get into the Google Drive, I guarantee you they're probably in there. That would be my guess. It's probably the best place to start. All right, let's ask some more questions. You can put them in the chat. Or you can try and unmute yourself. All right, since we don't have any questions right now, I'm going to stop sharing and let Sue share her screen, and she's going to show you where you can find how to do all these things, such as file an appeal, file a service sub, that sort of thing. All right, Miss Sue, let me.
As I've been frantically trying to create all these forms in my training queue so that we could actually do this, but
Stop sharing and pass the sharing over to you.
I'm going to give this one last try before, yeah. Cougar. All righty, where is this? What is this screen? I'm not sure it's letting me do it. They're all grayed out.
Oh my goodness. Okay, hold on. Let me see what I can do here. I think that I can click a button.
There we go. Oh, Lord. Which monitor is this? I just have to figure out which monitor is which. There we go. All right. Sorry, folks. I was in the middle of playing, because that's what I like to do here. So basically, you all should be familiar, or you will be intimately familiar shortly, with your landing page when you log into the portal. You'll be asked for, you're putting your little 6-digit code that you add either texted to you or emailed to you, and this is where you'll land. I am School District 40,183. Super quick. If you're this new, don't be afraid of anything you see here. We are all here to help you, and we've been through these forms 1,000 times. This is basically your school. Roxy was talking about this last week. If you needed to make changes in your window, and we used one school's example, what things you can and cannot change. In this window, we can actually change it though. So if you do not know such things as your rural-urban status, you can go through, change your address here, make sure you put in the right county. Somehow I'm in the District of Columbia, even though I was in New Hanover County last time I checked. And put in, as Roxy mentioned, your state LEA code. How are you doing your student counts, all your different schools and whatnot. These are my schools, and yes, these were my dogs or are my dogs, just so everybody knows. Very important stuff here. Once you make a modification, just give it a quick nickname, you know, quick show of and change. Again, when you get hit by the proverbial bus, somebody else will be looking at this portal and saying, oh, I guess they changed something about our billing entity. You can always get back to your home field by clicking on this little blue Alexander's motif, and that's just a New Jersey reference, so sorry. If you need to, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, if you don't see that, because some pages don't have it, if you go to report, you'll see my landing page, and it will take you there.
See right there? My applicant landing page. So either one puts you back in this hot mess of everything E-rate. Most of the information on here, so you know, everything that you'll ever need to do that is new. We talked about putting in a Form 470, creating 471, answering your 486, filing an appeal, filing an invoice delivery date extension, the Form 500, a spin change, service substitution. These are all new things are up in this corner. Because, and I'm going to jump through the rest of this, when you need to look at stuff you've already done, that's down here. If you've already created a Form 470, what year did you create your Form 470 for? Let's see. I think I just created one for 2022. You will see things that you have done. If you needed to create a new Form 470, you'd go back to the top. If you want to see your 471s, I had one for 2021. They're all in an incomplete status because I was practicing for my interview for this job here. And yes, I cannot tell a lie. If you're looking for information post-commitment, we mentioned appeals. We mentioned spin changes. We mentioned service substitutions. Because I don't have any completed 471s, we can't actually create one because I can't create the 471, but they would be here as well, showing below, and for the funding years available. So if you needed to create a spin change, it's as simple as, let's create a spin change. It's going to bring you to your screen. It wants to know the nickname, Sunesis to Crown Castle for funding year 21. We're doing that right now. What type of change is this? This is literally a spin change. Crown Castle gobbled up Sunesis, so they're consolidating all their spins into one. Who's the main contact person? You can do a search. That's going to be me. What funding year are you making this change for? Funding year 21. I should get an error message because I won't have any funding requests available. But the next screen here would then allow you to pick the funding request. In this case, for my WAN connections from Sunesis, I could choose that funding request. It would be added. It would be listed down below. I'd hit continue, and then I would go into the FRN and change the spin number to reflect the spin, the mama bear, so to speak, spin for Crown Castle. So, and it would then show back on your home page. The same is true for any of these other changes that are across the top. If you needed to do a service substitution, similar thing. You're going to go in there, give it a nickname. I can show you to a point. Give it a nickname, change to chassis bundle, you know, for extreme. Funding year 21. We're going to pick funding year 21. Who is the main contact person? I have a lot of people that work in the school district. My whole team, me, myself, and I. And again, because I have no open 471s, I cannot go any further, but you guys will have them. They will stay with your Ben, even if, you know, Mary Jane is now responsible for E-rate and is just learning how to spell it because Bob, you know, won the lottery last week. Everything that Bob has filed, you will find in this portal. So it won't be like you have to, you know, reinvent the wheel. But nicknames will become very important to you and your best friend if you find out that you are in that position and Bob didn't share the lottery with you. So if there's like any questions about these forms, I mean, I can chug through some of them to show you, you know, and as a down and dirty, but we do have all of our training set up on our webpage. Adam has, you know, rebuilt that and organized it in a way, you know, a little bit more concise way with all of our PowerPoint slides. There are videos on how-tos that go back to either the USAC page or, you know, to our little training sessions. We have our E-rate handbook that has the same links listed therein. And Roxy, if you wanted to take this back, I don't know if your last slide had those resources listed, or if you'd like me to show them.
I do have them listed.
Cool. Then I can show them. So this is our E-rate handbook. We have the table of contents across the top. There are also hot links across the bottom. So if you're looking at what to do to make a spin change, there you go. And this will land you right on the how do I make a spin change and the rules that we spoke about. If you need to do a service substitution, write to the USAC webpage, how to do it. And here's the information that you might need. So we try to keep everything in front of you. We try to keep everything on our webpage. Let's see if I can get there from here. I can. This is our webpage where we do have, as an example, here's all our fall 2021 training. So you guys went to the November 1st, November 8th. Here's the slide deck. Here's the recording you can hear. Once we finish this one, you'll see those same two links here. We've got our Category 2 and mini-bid training. USAC will lead the training on Wednesday from 3 to 4. That is a separate webinar experience that you'll need to log into. Ours has our own registration, so these are both hot links to the 3 to 4 by USAC. And then we'll finish with the North Carolina mini-bid process. But again, once these are completed, we'll just put the links to the USAC-led training and to our training, the Form 470 for funding year 22, any resources that you might need. How do I fill out a Form 470? What, you know, are our timelines? What are these cost sheets and all these things? They all can be found here. What is a Form 471? We talked about the 486. And you can go to the training video right here. We spoke of the bear. So all of these things you will find hot linked either directly to USAC, to our internal resources, to some of our peers' websites. You know, right? Why reinvent the wheel? If they're willing to share with us, we'll share with you. So that all is there. And I'm sure I've missed something because I wind up getting focused and making left turns to Albuquerque. So there's something I was missing.
Perfect.
Were there any questions about, because I lost my chat screen when I did that. There it is. We good?
I can't see the chat screen either.
I don't see any new chat in there, or any new messages, at least to all participants.
Or all presenters.
That's it, yes.
They usually only talk to Roxy. I guess it's because they're afraid of my jersey.
That's funny. You're so funny. All right. Well, folks, if you don't have any other questions, we're going to call this done. And we appreciate you joining us. You know, you can email any of us if you have any further questions. We'll post this as usual. And we hope to see you at the next session on the 17th. Please do take some time and join the USAC session as well, and then join us at 4.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Going to stop the recording now.
Toodles.
Bye.